It started as a whim, the kind of impulse buy that feels innocent under the golden haze of a Sunday afternoon. I found the vanity in the back of an antique shop that smelled of cedar, rot, and forgotten lives. It was an imposing piece, crafted from dark, swirling mahogany that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The merchant, a man with skin like crinkled parchment and eyes that refused to meet mine, sold it to me for a price so low it felt like a theft. I lugged it home, polished the tarnished brass knobs, and positioned it in the corner of my bedroom, directly opposite the bed. That was my first mistake. The glass was old, silvered, slightly wavy, and possessed of a clarity that felt invasive. At first, it was just furniture. A place to store my watch, a mirror to fix my collar before heading out. But on the third night, the shift happened. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, tie undone, staring into the silver depths, when I noticed the discrepancy. I was looking at my own reflection, at the familiar backdrop of my bedroom, the wardrobe door slightly ajar, the stack of books on the nightstand, the shadows pooling in the corners. Everything was there. Everything except the space directly behind my left shoulder. It looked like a blind spot, a smudge of static in the visual field of the glass. I leaned in, squinting, thinking it was a defect in the antique mirror. I wiped the surface with a microfiber cloth, expecting the blur to vanish. It didn't. Instead, the blur sharpened. As I stared, the static began to coalesce, knitting itself together into a shape that defied the geometry of the room. It was a man, or the silhouette of one, towering over me. He was tall, unnaturally so, his head scraping the ceiling joists in the reflection. But where a face should have been, where eyes, a nose, a mouth should have offered some semblance of humanity, there was nothing but smooth, pale skin, stretched tight like parchment over a featureless oval. He was standing right behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, caged bird desperate for escape. I spun around. The room was empty. The air was still. The shadows were just shadows. I turned back to the mirror, my breath hitching in my throat. He was still there. Closer now. The faceless man had leaned down, his elongated, spindly fingers resting inches from my shoulders. I couldn't feel them. The mirror showed the contact, but the real world remained cold and tactilely vacant. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat, choked off by a sudden, freezing pressure that felt like the bottom of the ocean. This was not a haunting, it was a tethering. He wasn't just in the mirror. He was using the mirror as a doorway, a thin, fragile interface between his world of silence and mine of noise. I left the lights on. I tried to cover the glass with a heavy woolen blanket, but in the morning, the blanket lay on the floor, folded neatly, and the mirror was uncovered, waiting. He had moved closer. In the reflection, he was now leaning over me, his featureless face inches from the back of my neck. I could see the texture of his suit in the glass, a fabric that looked like woven funeral shrouds, smelling, even through the glass, of damp earth and wet iron. I stopped sleeping. I spent my nights huddled in the living room, but the vanity was always there, lurking in the peripheral vision of every doorway. I started to see him in other things. A window reflection. A darkened television screen. A puddle on the sidewalk. He was everywhere that light caught a surface, waiting for me to look, waiting for me to acknowledge his encroaching proximity. The fear evolved into a sick, agonizing curiosity. Who was he? Why me? I began to research the mirror, tracing the shop records back decades, then centuries. I found references to the vanishing man, a legend whispered among collectors of cursed objects. They said he was a collector of perspectives. If you looked into the glass long enough, you became the reflection, and he became the observer. My world began to fray at the edges. Colors grew muted. Sounds became distant, as if I were listening to them from underwater. My own reflection in the mirror was growing translucent, ghostly, while the faceless man was gaining weight, substance, gravity. He was feeding on my identity, harvesting my very presence to fuel his transition into my reality. Yesterday, I tried to break the mirror. I took a heavy brass candlestick and swung it with all the force my failing muscles could muster. The impact made no sound. The glass didn't shatter, it rippled like water. My candlestick passed through the surface, disappearing into the dark, impossible bedroom beyond. The faceless man didn't flinch. He reached out, his hand passing through the mirror and grasping the collar of my shirt. It felt like needles of ice. He pulled, a gentle but irresistible tug, dragging me toward the silver threshold. I am sitting here now, in front of the vanity. My body is barely a whisper of light in the glass. I can see my own face, fading, losing its definition, the features blurring into the same pale, blank canvas that defines him. He is standing behind me, and for the first time, I understand. He isn't a monster. He is a vessel. And tonight, when the sun finally sets, he will step fully into this room, and I will be the one trapped behind the silver, waiting for the next fool to buy a piece of history and look too closely at the things that shouldn't be there. Don't look. If you see him, if you feel the chill of his breath on your neck when you're alone in front of a mirror, do not turn around. Close your eyes. Run. Because once he has your reflection, he is only seconds away from having you.